Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Nicole Rademacher. Looking forward to our conversation today, Nick.
Hey, Simon, I'm excited to be here.
You're excited to be here. Great. So I've been listening to you this afternoon. We obviously had a conversation last week. I've been listening to you this afternoon on Beth Syverson's podcast, which she's been a guest on mine. I've been a guest on hers, doing some great work over on the West Coast, because you're West Coast, aren't you? You're LA.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you in that intro, you describe yourself as a transcultural adoptee, and I think that's a term that is we don't hear quite as much as kind of transracial adoptee. So, can you tell us what you mean by a transcultural adoptee?
So I was adopted into a white family and grew up with a white American culture, but ethnically, my birth father is from Mexico. He's from Monterrey, Mexico, and he's an immigrant here. He's been living in the States since the 70s, and my birth mother is Caucasian and white, but I never had access to any Latino culture, much less a Mexican culture or a culture from Monterrey. And I don't, I present as white, so I don't feel that I can claim transracial. I don't see myself as having the same lack of access, or I see myself as being more privileged growing up in the world.
Yeah.
And even now.
Yeah. Interesting. On the intro to on Beth's website, she quotes you as saying, "I spend a lot of my life, and even through my art, just looking for belonging." And I have to say that brought a little tear to my eye.
Oh.
So, and the bit that brought that actually made that even trickier for me is when I looked at it again. I saw that you say the word spend. So this is in the present, mm-hmm, rather than in the past. You don't say I spent a lot of my life just looking for belonging. And the next question that I thought of, the next thing that hit me off the back of that is how tricky, how kind of nebulous, how unclear, like a sense of belonging. It's like it. I mean, you're an artist, right? You're saying even through your art, you're looking for a sense of belonging, and it's like a sense of belonging that seems really tricky for me, because I'm probably a little bit more left brain than you are. You're spending more time as a creative. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
About how I look for
a sense of
belonging and sense of belonging. So I mean, I think that I think I've spent, have spent, as we look at like in the past and continuing into the present, a lot of my time in what I do, and even in like moving cities, moving countries, moving continents, is looking for this sense of belonging. Like living in foreign cultures, you're supposed to not belong, so therefore I belong because I don't belong. And I think looking at how people interact with one another, even just like watching people on the street or on the beach or things like that, like the series of videos I did, gosh, a long time ago, 2000, called You Are Not, or You Are a Perpetual Tourist, was really about looking at how people know that they belong, through gestures, through like looking how children are interacting amongst themselves, or how they're interacting with the adults, you know, presumably related to them, you know, on the streets and parks, on beaches, just in public spaces. And then more recently, I have a piece called Can I Grieve That Which Never Was, which is a series of photo collages, where I scanned everything so I wouldn't destroy the archival images, but I took photos of like 4x6s and 5x5s and things like that of me growing up, and cut myself out, and then scanned photographs of my biological family during the same time period, and I blew it up to like 8x10 and then like placed them on top of each other. Some of it doesn't match up. It's not like when I was one, this is what was going on with my birth family, but kind of trying to figure out, where do I fit in, because I don't really fit into either. Like, I wasn't in my birth family's life at this moment, but at the same time, you know, while I love and feel really supported with my adoptive family, there's a lot of, and I think a lot of other adoptees can also have a similar experience of not necessarily feeling like you belong in this adoptive family because you were placed there. And a lot of us don't have mirroring, or are missing a culture, or just things are really, you know, just really different. So yeah, and I guess I should probably go back and just make sure that people listening understand that my birth parents married 2 years after I was born, and then had 2 other children, two boys. So I have like this intact birth family. So I could kind of like take scans of those photographs, because it was actually missing out on this family experience.
Yeah. I memory comes to my mind. I went to Australia on business, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago. It was a mad trip. I just went for 4 days, all that way for 4 days. And as I went out of the airport, I thought I could just disappear here. I could just, nobody knows me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, apart from the guys I was going to meet, you know, but where were they? Somewhere. They were like a 2-hour drive from Sydney. I could just disappear, and it was like a chilling, you know, a chill ran down my spine about arriving in somewhere completely new, where nobody knows me. I was also thinking about you know, you had described about the time that you'd spent in Europe when we spoke last time, and this being part of the search. And I was thinking that the stories that we sometimes hear about people traveling, we hear people of there's a new Beatles unheard Beatles track being released this week or something like that. And I was reading up about reading this story. There's a book out, I think, by one of the roadies or something like that, who went on them with their trip. They went east, you know, they went to India,
Mm-hmm.
to find themselves. A lot of people went to find themselves in that spiritual kind of space, mm-hmm. in India, in the East. So they went to find who they were. They went to find identity. It was about them, but yours is about belonging, or is it belonging, and is it also identity? Is it, because belonging it to me is about our connection with others,
Well, yes, belonging is about connection with others, but I also think you have to understand who you are in order to have that sense of belonging. And I mean, you don't have, it doesn't have to be complete. It's not like, oh, I know exactly who I am and whatever, but it's like, if you have a sense of who you are, then, you know, you have a sense of when you find community. But, you know, it's also, you know, I mean, in my work, I also like, look at culture or look at cultures. I would like to think really closely. I in gosh, it was like 10 years ago or something. I did a residency in Kenya, and the impetus for the residency was to see what type of cross-cultural connections there were. And I spent 3 months there in Nairobi and in the Central Province. I think it's got a different name now. But what I walked away with, I mean, I walked away with a couple of pieces, but the larger piece that I walked away with was called Gate Pass. And I was just really struck by these like large, mainly metal gates that people have on the fronts of their homesteads, like in order to enter into their land, or even with apartment buildings. And how sometimes there were like gates but really no fence, or the fence was just like two pieces of wire. And it was just really interesting to me, this idea of like security and intimacy and keeping people out and keeping something in. And, you know, how that also relates to belonging and how that relates to community, because, you know, when you let people in, then you're creating this community. So, you know, I think I've also investigated it kind of that route as well. So, I mean, ultimately, you know, yes, it's all about me because it's my art, and I'm trying to explore and investigate things for myself. But at the same time, kind of how does that relate for other people, and how does that talk about, you know, who we are as human beings.
Yeah. How long have you been in LA now?
We moved here in 2012.
Yeah. So it's 11 years. Has that period in one place, has that supported a sense of an increased sense of belonging to you?
Yeah. I've never lived it with outside of where I grew up. We moved to North Carolina when I was in second grade. Outside of there, I've never lived in a place this long. Before that was when I lived in Santiago, Chile for 4 years, which is where we moved to LA from. And I never imagined myself in Southern California, much less in Los Angeles. It was, yeah, you know, I grew up in the South. I grew up with a Midwestern family. LA was kind of this outside world. I'd met some people from California in general, and didn't feel a sense of community with them much. I mean, there were some people that I was friends with, but it still felt kind of distant. So it's been a very pleasant surprise to find community here. I've found community in with other artists, and, you know, in the arts and cultural community in general. I've found community with parents, which has been really wonderful, because it really does take a village to raise children. And, you know, despite it being incredibly expensive, yeah, I'm starting to have that belonging.
Yeah.
Here it feels very accepting.
Because you've got these two very interesting parts to you, parts to your world from the creative part and the therapy, the therapy part of your work, and obviously I know that there's a link because you do a lot of art therapy, where that's one of the tools, I guess, that you bring out of your toolkit. But for some of your clients, because I'm listening to your conversation with Beth, it works for some of them, but less so for others, I guess. I'm wondering, your training as a therapist, what has that had an impact on your belonging?
I mean, I think it's given me another community, right? You know, like the people that I studied with, and then even outside of that, the people that I work with, the places where I work. It offers another place to find belonging. And I think, you know, you're not going to belong everywhere, but you kind of find that little niche of where you feel that somebody, at least one other person, kind of understands something that you're going through.
I guess my question was really about how, you know, for me, healing is about a change. Healing involves an insight, a change of perspective, an aha moment. So I had this on a podcast yesterday, actually. People, you know, the story is, or the saying is, that time is the greatest healer. And I mean, what do you agree with? To what extent do you agree with that?
Well, I think you have to do the work in that time.
Yeah,
I think you can't just let something sit there because it'll just fester.
Indeed, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. You know, the work, whatever that work is, creates the healing in kind of in my take on healing, by leading to an aha moment, a change in something that we believed, when we see something new, when we see that when we see how our lens is affecting our world, you know, the adoptee lens, maybe the
I mean, I think I was just going to say, I think it's kind of a series of, I feel like aha moment it sounds like very big, but I get what you're saying. Is kind of like this moment of insight, right? It doesn't have to be huge, but it can be like a small moment of insight. And I think that healing is definitely that. It's definitely a series of it. And I think when we talked a couple of weeks ago, we talked about coming out of the fog, and how coming out of the fog isn't necessarily like this big moment of like, I am now out of the fog and I can see everything so clearly. It's kind of like a series of moments of when you start to understand your story, or yourself, or your birth parents, or even understanding perspective of your adoptive parents, and how these things shape who you are.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is, to talk about the size of them. So there's big moments and there's little moments. So I sometimes talk about epiphanies, you know, using a kind of more spiritual kind of language, and then epiphanettes, right? Epiphanettes is a little moment. You know, so sometimes if I'm on a group course with somebody, there's some kind of, or you're having a group conversation, and there's some epiphanies, and then you get epiphany envy, because more people are getting insights bigger than yours, right? So the joke is about having an epiphanet. Kind of, it makes it okay, so that you don't. Epiphanettes are the kind of the cure for epiphany envy. And so I'm wondering what your training as a therapist, what effect that's had on your sense of belonging, or insights into your sense of belonging. You see what I mean?
Oh, I see. Gosh, it must. I guess I haven't really thought about it like that. So it's kind of hard for me to articulate that. But I mean, it makes sense, right? Because here I've gone through this training to be a therapist, to work with other people, to kind of help them understand their belonging and their paths to healing. So yeah, I guess in how like how I work through my own pain. Sometimes I kind of therapize myself, which you shouldn't ever do. But, but
we'll forgive you.
Yeah, thanks. I know, my poor therapist who has to deal with me therapizing myself. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, yeah, like thinking back to classes and how you need to do the work and the insight into your own life and healing process in those classes. And then, the program that I chose at Loyola Marymount, has a specialization in clinical art therapy. So we did art in every class. And that was kind of the point for me, was to be able to bring in the therapeutic aspect of art while we're doing these things. But I remember, this is probably totally off topic, but maybe it's what you're going for. In our class, our adolescent class, so when we learned about just the life stage of adolescence, we had to do a video on identity formation. And I really tried. I tried to do this deep dive of when I was in high school and what I did for my identity formation. And I had my mom send me yearbooks and photo albums and things like that, so that I could make this video. And in the end, I remember what I said in the video was that I actually didn't do that work in high school. I did stuff, I tried on different identities and things like that, but I didn't really do the deep dive that was being taught to me. That's what happens during early adolescence. I actually did it in late adolescence. And since then I've found out that a lot of times adoptees emotionally develop a little bit later. Some of our developmental stages are a little bit later because of the trauma of relinquishment or other traumas that we've experienced. So yeah, and I hadn't reflected on my life like that. There's certain things that you kind of just take for granted and move on. But yeah, the education kind of gave me moments to reflect on who I am.
So do you see a link between healing and belonging?
I think that finding a sense of belonging can create great healing for people. But I think it depends on what, are you struggling with loneliness? Because then you're struggling with belonging, right? But if you're struggling with depression, maybe it's linked to loneliness, but maybe it's not. I think it really depends on what you're struggling with. But we are this ultra social beings, human beings. And so connection is very important for us to be healthy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a straight
No,
answer.
we're at the edge of, we're exploring at the edge of my vocabulary and my understanding. So that's cool. What has what, because you've been in reunion, did I hear you say since 2004? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We're going on 20 years.
Yeah. So what has reunion, what effect has reunion had on your sense of belonging?
I mean, for me, finding out that my birth father was a creative person, like a symphony percussionist, was really important to me as an artist, because my adoptive parents are, my mom's an administrator and my dad's an electrical engineer, so like very kind of straightforward, salt of the earth people, and
left brainy type people, right?
Yeah, I mean, they always supported me as a creative, and I don't think I started to really explore my creativity until I left for college, when I went to architecture school. And my mom painted, but my mom isn't a painter, like that's not her profession. So I think that that's really different. So that was really important for me, to understand where that came from. And my birth mother was a teacher, before she retired, and finding out that also a lot of her brothers and sisters are also teachers, and I taught for many years. And I think that therapy also, and the way that I approach therapy with like the rapport building and kind of working collaboratively, kind of comes from there. When I first received images of them and of relatives who had died, was beautiful and hard because it was like beautiful to finally see people who I look like and have that sense of belonging, but then like really hard because it's like I missed out on knowing where my nose came from, where the shape of my face came from, that the skin that I live in is a part of a lineage, because being from a closed adoption, you can feel like an alien. Yeah. And who knows if that, maybe that's true. We don't know anything about extraterrestrials, being adopted. You could be an alien. Who knows?
You talked about coming out of the fog. Since then, what have been some of the aha moments that you've had, large or small, on your kind of healing journey?
I think, understanding that, I came from this long lineage of people, and ethnically, culturally, interest-wise, has been pretty pivotal. I think also getting to know my birth family as a family and their family dynamic has also been really eye-opening, because even though I'm 45 and have been in reunion for almost 20 years, there's still like a fantasy of like, how beautiful would it have been if I had grown up with them? But they're people just like anybody else. And so they have family dynamics, and it isn't always comfortable, and that's okay.
What was it like? You said it was pretty pivotal seeing this, seeing your what's the word? Predecessors, your lineage, your antecedents. I'm not sure what the word was. How was that for you? You say pretty pivotal, but what did that mean for you emotionally?
I was raw for a really long time. I remember taking a bath after receiving an image via email and just sobbing and like just touching my skin, just like touching my hand and touching my arm and just like, this doesn't just belong to me. And I think that's kind of the other thing too. I don't know if anybody else can identify with this, but like belonging, it's like if you're from a closed adoption, it's like you only belong to yourself, but we do want that connection. So we want to belong with other peoples and other communities. But it was like, oh, wow, I belong somewhere. Like if I take a picture with this family, I'll fit in, as opposed to the picture with my adoptive family where, I mean, I'm white enough, but like I'm short. I don't have blue eyes.
Yeah.
And my face shape is completely different. My nose is completely different.
Isn't it great how you explain it through a what you would look like in a photograph with them?
Mm-hmm. And what's really funny, what I love, and I don't know how to explain this to people who were not adopted in a closed adoption, like on so many of the like adoptee Facebook groups and things like that, we'll post a picture of ourselves and this other relative, right? Who we just found, and like, oh my gosh, look at the similarities, or a picture of us with that other person because we had a reunion meeting or, whatever. And to anybody else, like if you grew up with your biological family, that's just like a picture of you and your brother. And it's just like, how is that meaningful? That means nothing. But to us, it's so important. And it's so, at least for me, so transformative as far as just like understanding that you're not alone in the world. And maybe your reunion, isn't all rainbows and unicorns, but it's important to know where you come from.
Yeah. I got a picture when I got the confirmation. This is about, I don't know, 7 years or so. When I got a letter that confirmed my suspicion. So I was 99.9% sure that my birth mother had died, and I'd found the right record on a search, through a Google search. And when a letter arrived from Canada that confirmed that from her brother, so my birth uncle, I guess you would call him, it had a couple of pictures of my birth mother, Pat, and I couldn't see any resemblance at all. But my wife said, "Well, that's where your nose comes from," and I still couldn't see it. But a few years later, I looked at it. I thought, yeah, okay, I can see my nose. I haven't seen a picture of my birth father, but oh no, I have actually. I've seen a picture of him, but he's very young, and it's a very small picture. You can't really tell much about it. But I do know I'm about the same size as him, same height as him, should we say? So yeah, these. But isn't it great that the photos as an artist, the metaphor that you use to describe it is that the visual one. I guess I'm trying to get to the emotion underneath the visuals. Do you see what I mean?
I mean, it creates a storm in you, right? I mean, but there's also, I think there's maybe a sense of pride too. Like I'm also remembering when I sent photos to my birth family via email, and my birth father wrote back, "Oh, you do look Latin American." There was like a sense of pride for me, for
Yeah.
like, okay, I am coming from somewhere. It is, I do belong, I guess, to go back to that first word that we started with. And but there's also a lot of pain in it because of what we didn't experience, and um grief, I think, of missing out on belonging.
Yeah.
um
I touched a couple of minutes ago on the kind of, and in a kind of jokey way, about your mum being you said your mum was dad's an engineer, and your mum was a teacher and administrator. Is that right? Administrator.
yeah, my adopted mom is an administrator.
Administrator. Yeah. And I joked about kind of left brainy stuff.
Mm.
Have you, in your training to be a therapist, have you touched on any areas around kind of left and right brain stuff?
I don't know enough to really
Okay.
talk about it intelligently.
Okay. So I'm mentioned this on a couple of podcasts recently, but I'm reading I listened to a couple of books by neuroscientists. They're not professional. They're books for lay people.
Right.
But the left brain is the kind of the meaning maker, the one that wants the meaning and the logic and draws the conclusions, and it's also the place of our inner critic. There's a specific point within the left brain that's where our inner critic hangs out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say our, I mean humans' inner critic. I don't mean adoptees' inner critic, because we don't have the monopoly on inner critics. But the right brain stuff is, all our language is in the left brain as well. Our language center is in the left brain. And obviously that's not formed when we're born. That language, we don't have capacity for language when we're born. Whereas the right hand part of our brain is the creative space. It's the playful space. It's the stuff where new ideas kind of happen. And so by going into the creative, by doing what you're doing with art therapy, art as your way of exploring, looking for a sense of belonging, and art as a way of doing art therapy and stuff like that, you're tapping into right brain stuff, which is a bigger, it's a spacious space, right? And we're kind of like, we're going around the left brain logic side, and to the places, the spacious place where change happens, or where creative new ideas, so an epiphany, or an epiphanet, an aha moment comes from that creative space. So how do you see the creative process in respect to healing?
I see it as like bottom up way of healing, where working with somebody who's only kind of speaking, it's kind of like a top down, because you're making sense of what's going on and then articulating it, rather than coming in from the bottom and just kind of experiencing and exploring whatever those sensations are, or those emotions, or that experience on a non-verbal level. And then bringing in the verbal and the articulation to gain insight and have the epiphanies and epiphanettes.
Okay.
Because I also work somatically with my clients, which has a lot of research behind it as far as like trauma living in the body and how we approach that. And trauma also comes in the big T's and little T's. But it's all about how we experience those, it's just because it was a little T doesn't mean that it didn't affect us in a grand way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So top for top down would be left brain. Top down and left brain are kind of are in the same space, are they?
Yes.
They're kind of they're different metaphors for this, but the same thing. They're pointing at the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas,
yeah. Sorry, 1 second.
So ladies and gentlemen, listeners, we just had a bit of a glitch there. So does that make sense? So left brain is top down, and bottom up is that body and that whole body approach of somatics, and also that right brain space. So we're pointing at this. We're saying different things, but then we're meaning kind of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the same way as, but you're bringing in, after you've had some breakthrough through the bottom up approach, you're then going into the space of the top of the top or the left brain. You're looking at the logic behind stuff after you've had the creative expression.
Yeah, kind of articulating and understanding better what your experience was.
Yeah. So we've had I mention this when we spoke last week? I talked about having some adoptee poets on the show. So they have read one of their poems, and then I've kind of said, well, I'm getting this out of it. Their poems have been full of metaphor and imagery and stuff that doesn't make rational sense. And then I will say so this is what I'm getting out of that. This is what I'm learning for it. So I'm kind of rationalizing their poetry, and then we're having a discussion about the different takes on different things. Same to me, kind of seems the same approach, or similar approach. We're engaging both parts of. We're engaging the right brain first, and then left brain for logic and rationale.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no poet, but it's my understanding that poetry is also working in that right brain.
Right brain.
I can't keep it straight.
Yeah.
Okay. The right brain, kind of creative, nonlinear, emotive space.
Yeah. And what I loved, I was listening to a podcast about a guy who's saying, well, so much of our life is spent, debating and arguing and agreeing and all these different things. But he said, nobody argues with a poet. And I thought that was a beautiful way of saying it, because with art, you don't argue about a piece of art. You're looking at it, and it's your own interpretation. So it's kind of more personal.
Yeah. It makes me think about how we argue about people's emotions and lived experiences. Because I mean, really, you can't argue with that, but we argue it all the time.
Yeah. The other thing, I wrote a few. I wrote a poem when I was 10 for a class project, an English project, but I've not written one since. But I wrote a couple a few months or so ago, and they came fairly easy to me because I had the metaphors. I have looked at, you know, the out of the fog metaphor, the primal wound metaphor, and I've looked at different things around that. I've played with those metaphors. I've extended those metaphors. So I've got a good grounding in metaphor, and that made it really easy for me to write the poem, right? Because all I was doing was putting flowery words and verbs and stuff. They just came out of me in a couple of minutes, really easy flow. And I'm wondering what metaphors. I mean, are metaphors as big for you in your creative endeavors?
Hmm.
Or in your life, is there a metaphor that?
Well, it's interesting to think about because I generally work with documentary material, whether it's video or audio or photographs or things like that. I mean, I think like in the Can I Agree That Which Never Was, I cut myself out. So, that's a metaphor.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a piece now with my original birth certificate, which I'm assuming because I'm in contact with my birth family, I'm allowed to get, because my understanding is Wisconsin's a closed state, but and there I'm working with a lot of metaphors of like erasure.
Yeah. What was the first name that your birth parents gave you? Do you know that? You must have, I guess. Sorry?
Stephanie. Yeah, and then it's pretty heavy on me because my last name is my birth mother's maiden name, and I've been in reunion almost 20 years, so I just assumed my last name was my birth father's name, but because he wasn't there, that's not my last name, and so that hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts to know that he wasn't there. It hurts that, especially as I try to claim my identity as Mexican, it hurts that I don't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a metaphor for identity? Because it's a multi-layered thing, right? Identity is a multi-layered thing, and a lot of, like, when I got my birth mother's name, which was what I was expecting to get at a meeting. I went into to meet a guy, a post-adoption social worker kind of chap. I was expecting to get her name, fair enough, but I also got my name, the name that she gave me, which was David. So I was David Anthony Flower, and I thought, that's interesting. I've had two names. And then I heard something about, well, names are labels that we're given, right? And then we can disappear down a rabbit warren of when we look at this identity issue for us as adoptees. I'm just wondering if you have a view on identity, or how you identify? How do you, what's the metaphor? What's the name? How do you see identity?
I don't know if I have a metaphor for identity. I think that is something that I'm actively exploring for myself. Like I have a new project that I'm working on where I will actually travel to Monterrey. It'll be, I mean, technically it's not my first time in Mexico. I've been to Baja, but you know, it'll be my first time to visit my father's hometown. And I will meet my extended family in person rather than just random connections on Facebook. And I'll meet my father's childhood friends, which apparently I met one of them at my youngest brother's wedding. And that's something that I struggle with, right? Because I don't, there's so many things that I know about who I am. I'm an artist, I'm an art therapist, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. Like I have my labels that tie into communities. But deep down, I don't. And I think part of me is scared. I mean, it's scared, right? And I think this whole time it's been scared because I've kind of like tiptoed around this idea of understanding my cultural heritage. You know, like I moved to Barcelona and learned Spanish. You know, I've listened to a lot of Latin American rock. I moved to Chile and lived there for 4 years, but none of those are Mexico. None of those are Monterrey. I didn't, knowing where he was from, I didn't immediately go there to like have great epiphanies. Because it's scary. Yeah.
Go safely.
What'd you say?
Go safely on your trip.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be, you know, working with an art therapist prior to going to really hold that space for me. To figure out what I'm doing and be safe emotionally. And my birth father is helping me. I mean, it's kind of his thing too, but also like it's also his hometown and his friends and his family. So he's helping me coordinate everything and making sure that I'm safe physically as well. But yeah, I'm trying to take the precautions to be safe emotionally.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Is there anything that I've not asked you about that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I mean, I think the only thing is, I mean, thank you for the opportunity to talk and talk about my story in a different way. I think I've really enjoyed the time with you. And then I also want to share with your listeners about the project I'm working on called We Are Not Our Cruxes, which is, it's been funded through the California Arts Council. And there'll be a series of 5 events starting November 8th.
Yeah, I was going to say it's next weekend after next, isn't it? Yeah.
November 18th, and they'll be monthly. So there'll be one in December, one in January, one in February, one in March. And essentially they're the same event in that they're 3 hours and we do a panel discussion and then some reflective art making and sharing. But they're different in the fact that each session will have different panelists. And those of you who have either been through the foster care system or were adopted are invited to be part of a research project that's connected to it. So it's an art and research project to better understand our struggles and for us as adults, because I think that that's is something that the rest of the world doesn't understand, that kids have struggles, but then we become adults and we still have struggles.
Yeah. So there's you're going to put a link in the show notes to that.
Oh yeah, and then it's, if you just I've got everything kind of on a short a bit.ly, so it's bit.ly/we are not our cruxes all together.
Yeah. Okay. We'll put the bit.ly link in the show notes as well. So I know people are walking dogs, driving, or ironing. Sorry, that's the things I do when I'm listening to podcasts.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where's my pen? Yeah, what I often do is, if I'm walking the dog, I'll email myself, my little epiphanies or my little thoughts. I'll email myself as I'm walking, and I've not got my glasses on when I'm walking, so that can be slightly tricky. And then I transfer it to a little notebook when I get back. But yeah, it helps to have those the links in the show notes, and they're always there, listeners. So thank you very much, Nick. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
And I said earlier on, we're at the edge. We're at the edge of the zone here. We're tackling some pretty big stuff, and thanks for bearing with us, listeners, if you're still with us, obviously, because you are. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Simon.
Lots of love. See you soon, listeners. Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Okay.